Welcome to Season 3 of the Climate Conscious Podcast. I'm your host, Derval Barzey, bringing awareness to climate change and sustainable development from a Caribbean perspective. Connecting you to sustainability solutions as we move from awareness to action. Today's special guest is an independent consultant based in Washington, D.C. Her work focuses on the concepts and practice of sustainable manufacturing and open source circular economy. She has 38 years of technical and managerial experience, and her areas of expertise include sustainable manufacturing, product cycle management, strategic planning, market intelligence, business development, change, and risk management. Using an engineer's approach, she works to make sustainability attractive and practical for the engineering, manufacturing, and farming communities. She is dedicated to the adoption of the open source circular economy framework. She holds a MS degree in mechanical engineering, major in manufacturing from the Technical University of Cluj, Romania, and an MBA degree majoring in international management from the Indiana University, Bloomington. She is a member of Engineers for a Sustainable World, Open Source Circular Economy Global Community, and Union of Concerned Scientists. I am delighted to welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast, Ms. Silvia Leahu-Aluas.
Thank you very much, Derval. It is a great pleasure to be with you. I would like to congratulate you for the 1-year anniversary of your Climate Conscious Podcast. Also to thank you for your work. It's very encouraging when we meet each other, at least in the virtual space. It's encouraging to see how many people all over the world are working towards the common goal of solving the climate emergency and the many other crises that confront humanity currently.
Thank you, Silvia. So let's jump right in. When we speak about sustainable development, an important pillar is economic development. And we often hear about the fossil fuel economy, the green economy, the blue economy, but there's also the concept of the circular economy and particularly open source circular economy. So can you share with us what exactly is this open source circular economy framework?
Sure. As you mentioned, there are many alternative economic models that are being debated conceptually or tested in real life to replace the current economic model, which clearly is not sustainable and it's creating a lot of damage. So one of the concepts that is gaining a lot of traction at many levels, including among governments, local or national or at international level, is this concept of circular economy, which has many definitions. But I think a simple one is to think about it as a model that allows humanity to get back in harmony and in balance with natural ecosystems. So an economy that operates on the same principles as the natural ecosystems, where everything is exchanged, whether energy or food, or other resources, and absolutely nothing is wasted, where the whole is greater than its component parts and everything is interdependent. Adding to it the idea of open source means to share, to collaborate on all the solutions that people come up with all over the world. again, transparent and non-protected way. I think open source is very well understood in software, but it's less understood in physical products or in design or in processes. But it means sharing openly whatever solution you develop on your own or with your group without protecting it, patenting it, with a purpose and the belief that together, by collaborating with as many people as possible from many different socioeconomic and geographic environments, we will find the best solutions, and we would be able to improve or reject some solutions much faster than in the current economy where most of the ideas, most of the design is protected.
What stands out to me is the way that it contrasts significantly with the existing economic models that our society is based on. If you look at it, it's more of a linear model where you have inputs and you produce something and then there are outputs and waste. Whereas the circular model takes a regenerative approach or an ecosystem approach to economic activity. And what I also like is the sense of inclusiveness and collaboration. So given that our societies and our economies are so entrenched in that linear model, how do we make that shift towards open source circular economies?
By persevering, by being very assertive, by pretty much abandoning the current model ourselves. Although there are all kinds of debates on does individual action matter or not, in the end it matters because every aggregate action is made up by all the people in the world. So especially since we're asking for a major or an enormous transformation of the way we work and live, it is very important that we test our ideas on ourselves. So for instance, when I say we shouldn't be owning cars anymore, I should be the first one to try that, right? And this is where this open collaboration helps a lot, because people are constantly exchanging their experiences, their ideas, in order to come up with something that will be universally accepted and feasible.
Okay, so you mentioned something very interesting. So is it that in an open source circular economy, is it that car ownership would be a thing of the past?
In my view, yes.
Okay, explain that to us.
Because the very idea is to share as much as possible, right? And individual ownership is contrary to sharing. With cars, there are many more other aspects. How much resources an individual car takes, whether it's electric or not. Think about all the roads, all the parking, besides the manufacturing footprint. And it doesn't mean that cars will not exist, but can we get beyond owning them to sharing them? So whenever you need a car, which should be rarely, especially on an island, you should use a commonly owned car.
Wow, that's an interesting concept, shifting away from ownership to sharing. As someone who resides on an island, having your own vehicle has become almost like having a cell phone. So that's one of the things that people work towards in addition to owning your own home. So it really would be a shift of mindsets and behaviors to embrace the sharing economy. So what kind of transformation would be required to facilitate this sort of sharing economy that you are proposing?
Just to stay a little longer on the concept of sharing, Now, cars might be a more difficult example, but not impossible to adopt. But think about how popular tool sharing has become. So you have many communities where you have so-called tool libraries, which is pretty much based on the libraries themselves, where books are publicly owned and everybody can read them and then return them to be shared again with the whole community. So there are already, or community gardens, so there is this major trend on sharing resources. So I don't think it will be impossible to switch to sharing a car, which is different than shelter. Shelter is a basic need. Car is not. Right. So, and again, we can talk about, do you live in a privately owned house or a publicly owned house? But shelter is fundamental to people. Cars are not, because there are many alternatives to cars.
Well, I think in the Caribbean context, it may be a bit different, where in terms of getting, having access to, your place of work, and maybe if you live in a remote area, transportation becomes a necessity. And while I embrace the concept of the sharing economy, because we do have some examples of ride sharing existing currently. Uber came to Trinidad and Tobago, but there were some issues, so they left. But the concept of ride sharing is here. But I like the concept, for example, in terms of tool sharing, because how many of us may have a drill at home that you may use maybe once a year, if so much?
Mm-hmm.
So I do find this concept very interesting, and I'm just exploring how it can be, I guess, implemented in our unique circumstance.
Yeah, I'm not talking so much about Uber and other similar forms where pretty much they take the work from taxi drivers. By the way, taxi service is an alternative to car ownership. What if we have only taxis as a car option? Because like you said, the car also sits most of the time, like the drilling tool. It sits at home, it sits at your work, it's in use very little.
And it's a depreciating asset as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not only that, it's a money guzzler, right? Insurance, maintenance. It constantly requires expenses. Fuel and all that.
Yes.
But I'm referring more to sharing, whether it's by the public sector. Let's say the city of Port of Spain decides to offer a shared service for electric vehicles for everybody, which means you still drive it. But you drive it only when you need it. Paris used to have this service, and it used to be free. Now they're looking at other models. Or you could have groups of neighbors, like buying a car and owning it in common. And then agreeing on who can use it when, depending on their needs. The problem with cars, whether they're electric or not, again, is that they require a lot of land. And I think this is everywhere a constraint, but even more so on an island. Because land should be dedicated first and foremost to food production, and it should also be preserved for wilderness, for all the species outside of our own. There is a famous biologist, E.O. Wilson, who is asking us to reserve about 50% of the earth for wilderness. So think about that at your island level. But we have to think about this because, again, what we're trying to sustain, it's not only our advanced civilization and human life, but the entire biosphere in all its diversity. So reducing the number of individual cars will allow us to conserve a lot of land for much better purposes. Or think about the company-owned cars. That's a form of sharing, right?
Right.
So from a company car, you could move to a community car or a community fleet of cars.
Yes, a very interesting concept. And when we speak about cars and vehicles, I know globally there's a shift towards electric vehicles and e-mobility. So how does that fit into the circular economy?
It fits quite well because one of the characteristics of the circular economy is that it is or it should be based only on renewable resources. And clearly we can provide renewable energy everywhere. The barrier is not technological, the barrier is political, commercial, or of other social, cultural. We can provide renewable energy. So the electric vehicles are the alternative to the internal combustion engine vehicles. If the grid that you are using for charging is renewable energy, clean renewable energy. And I can give you an example from Corsica, another island, where the company Driveco is building the first smart solar mobility road in the world, which is about 150 kilometers between the two major cities in the north and the south of the island, anchored by their product called Parasol, which is 100% solar energy recharging station. That is also used in a smart grid structure, meaning the energy can be exchanged both ways. So if you have a vehicle that has the battery full or doesn't need to use it at a certain point, it can feed the grid with the solar energy that was provided by the charging station. And I think that's a solution that would work perfectly in Trinidad and Tobago, at least on the Big Island.
Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we are currently trying to make that shift. Being an oil and gas producer, all our energy systems are currently based on fossil fuels. Our electricity is almost 100% produced from natural gas. However, we do expect that within a year or so, we'll have our first 2 solar PV utility scale plants. So currently, if you have an electric vehicle, which there are a few on the island, the electric vehicle is being charged from a fossil fuel source.
Yeah, which almost defeats the purpose.
Yes.
Although it still matters that you have still zero tailpipe emissions, because those are also severe for the people's health. So it's still zero emissions in use, but yes, it still creates climate damage by using a fossil-based grid. But this is where thinking of energy and mobility as an integrated system can change things both ways, meaning the demand for electric cars can push the energy providers towards clean energy.
But what would stimulate that demand for electric cars?
Really, people's will to live and operate in a clean economy, people's awareness of the damage that they do by driving a fossil-based car, pretty much by using fossil fuels in whichever application. There is no path to solving the climate emergency through fossil fuels. So we need to stop using them. Another way to stimulate demand is the influence of the industry. So even if you don't have demand in a certain place, there is demand in another country or in another large market, which makes the industry slowly but surely abandon the internal combustion engine vehicles.
Well, we're seeing where the global community and global industry leaders are sending certain signals that we all need to move towards net zero and deep decarbonization across all end-use sectors, including transportation, but also industry and even the commercial sectors. The shift is happening, maybe a bit slower in my local context, but the signals are already being sent. Although I think more people have a greater level of awareness about the climate crisis, and we're already seeing the impacts here in our region, there still may be a bit of resistance to making that shift. They may see it as a sacrifice. I have to sacrifice personal ownership for the good of the planet. And they may not be prepared to make that shift, you know. So it is a big challenge, I think, on both ends.
Absolutely. What is important about an island like yours is that you're both seeing the impact of climate change that wasn't caused by you. Much more clearly and immediately than a country like mine, for instance, although clearly we're seeing it too. At the same time, an island can become a model for the rest of us by testing or creating all these alternative solutions and proving that they work. And then from there, it will be very easy to scale up to larger continents, which pretty much are also islands, if you think about it. In the end, we're all surrounded by ocean. And I think it will help people understand even better the limitation, the finite nature of our planet, which we could say it's an island in space. So again, one advantage of being on an island is that the limitations are much more tangible, are much more visible to you. But that also creates enormous opportunity to come up with very creative solutions to live within those limits and live well within those limits, which again create a model for the rest of us who think that we have unlimited resources. To adopt those solutions and be happy about them.
I like the concept that we are all islands, but looking directly at small island developing states like the Caribbean, I totally agree with you with the idea that we should adopt circular economic models. And I think we already possess some of the characteristics that will fit into that circular economy because I think we naturally know how to conserve the environment and we know how to reuse resources, but we have shifted away from that, that indigenous knowledge and that indigenous way of living towards developed, and I put that in inverted commas, in pursuit of that developed status that has shifted us away from that, that integrated approach and acknowledging that we are part of a larger ecosystem and that we have a responsibility to protect it as much as we seek to advance our development in various ways.
That's a very important point because circular economy is also a local economy like ecosystems are. There is no global ecosystem, right? There is a biosphere, which is a multitude of ecosystems, but ecosystems operate locally, which is also where the circular economy should focus on. So there will be less trade in physical stuff, which most of it is useless, right? If you think what we're shipping back and forth is impossible to comprehend.
You're going to put Amazon out of business?
Sorry?
You're going to put Amazon out of business?
Yes, anytime. The way we see things is that global trade will be mostly in ideas, in this sharing of solutions, than in physical stuff. And there are many arguments why we should do that. First of all, for self-preservation reasons, for resiliency reasons. You should always have your resources available locally, so you're not dependent on faraway providers of those resources. These also being constrained to a local area again forces people to use resources at the maximum. Not in the sense of depleting them, but using them without any waste, and not rely on again, a faraway provider of those resources. It also helps determine how much do we need for a good life. Do we need all that extra stuff?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. How much do we need?
Yes, and this is a question that we also need to solve urgently because, again, we are in this situation because we've been pursuing growth, economic growth, which means anything that we can make and more of it is what matters, not what our fundamental needs are. And paradoxically, despite all this growth and development, fundamental needs are not satisfied. We still have hunger, we still have poverty, we still have people without housing. While we have tons of or an infinite number of wants, symbolized again in all kind of stuff that looks very well for growing GDP, but doesn't help us a lot. On the contrary, again, has created the crisis, including a crisis of resources that we are in. Not only the climate, which is the most severe of them all. So in that respect, the circular economy. So I reject any idea that the circular economy is an alternative to growth, is an alternative for growth, or the idea that there is sustainable growth. No, growth shouldn't be economic. Growth shouldn't be at all the goal. The goal should be for us to live well together with the whole biosphere within the limits of our planet and the limits of each local area where we live in. So we should be pursuing maintenance, not growth, which is again what happens in nature. things grow and then decay and die and create life for the future generations. There is no unlimited growth. And if there is, that particular species will go extinct. A species that destroys its own habitat through excessive growth or excessive consumption of local resources disappears. And I'm afraid this is what we're experimenting with, we humans, at the moment.
Wow. Well, you said a lot there, and it's a lot to absorb. But I want to go back to the idea that the circular economy is based on a local economy and developing resilience and efficiency. What I'm reminded of is that it sounds a lot like the opposite of the current economic model that we're in, which to me is based off of exploitation, the exploitation of both natural and human resources. But, a challenge that I think we can have is that the world's resources are not equally distributed. So if we are limited to just the local economy, certain locations, just by virtue of where you were born, wouldn't have access to certain resources. What would be your response to that challenge?
It's a complicated issue, and I cannot pretend to have the answer, which cannot be a simple one. But I think we can all go back in history and see how did communities live before, as they were isolated from the global economy and from the global community. How did they make it? How are they able to rely mostly on local resources and still live well? So I think that's a challenge that we should take on. Think about food, for instance, which we're shipping all over the world, which is the least rational thing to do. There is food everywhere locally. Yes, it might not be as diverse as getting kiwi from New Zealand to Washington, D.C., but we can live without kiwis, or we can produce kiwis locally in a greenhouse, for instance, if you really want kiwis. It doesn't make any sense. Every time I see a label, kiwi from New Zealand, I can only picture the trip that kiwi made all half the world through here. That doesn't make any sense. On diesel, obviously. So I think before we should just experiment how every local economy can flourish within its limits, and then what do we really need from the outside? So we were talking about electric vehicles. You don't have lithium on the island, so clearly you will have to import lithium to make your own batteries, or import the whole battery. But how about some of your engineers discover an alternative to lithium that is available on the island? In any case, I think, again, we should try to see how much can we maximize local resources, which again induces us to use only abundant resources and not finite resources, which means mostly renewable. And then see what is left that we need from the rest of the world.
Okay, that is reasonable. And I think the pandemic and the initial lockdown, where borders were closed and there wasn't a lot of international trade happening, it really forced us to take another look at our local resources. It forced us to get creative and innovative with our locally available resources. That is a strategy that we should continue with going forward. A lot of people started doing backyard gardening and even recycling. I think that is an important element for the circular economy.
Exactly. So think about agriculture provides mainly food, but it provides also raw materials for industry. So we don't have time to talk about plastic, which is the fossil-based plastic, almost 90% of it, which is catastrophic. But that is clearly an example that can be easily substituted with natural or agricultural materials. What you said is very important, because here is where open source and open collaboration comes in. You would be able to constantly exchange knowledge with other islands and other communities in the world to see what solutions did they adopt in the same way you provide them with your solution. So it's not everybody on their island in a metaphorical way struggling to find the best solutions, but constantly learning from others. So either you adopt somebody else's solutions, or they adopt yours, or you improve on somebody else's solution. And in the end, we create all this enormous network all over the world of local open source circular economies that all work well.
Yes, thinking global and acting local, right?
Exactly.
And I must say again, during the pandemic, with everyone going virtual, it really allowed for the open exchange of ideas. You and I met through the virtual Island Ambassador program, which brought together islanders from all over the world to exchange ideas and collaborate in addressing the sustainability issues that we each face.
Exactly. That was a splendid and excellent event, and also an example of how people can get connected without ever meeting. I mean, what is the chance of us two meeting in other circumstances? Pretty low. But here we are, and I'm very happy to have met you and many other people. And this is exactly how things will change, with all of us collaborating, exchanging knowledge, sharing everything we design or discover, so that we get to the ultimate purpose, which is to put a stop to the current human-induced climate change before it's too late.
And likewise, I am very happy to have met you and for you introducing me to this concept of open source circular economy. And I'm very glad that we were able to at least start the conversation. There's a lot to absorb and unpack around this topic, but I think it's an important one to have as we reframe our notion of development and our concept of economic development. Again, during the pandemic, there was this notion of the new normal and building back better. But at times it felt as if we were just trying to return to the old normal, with a few tweaks. But it's clear that we need to make some radical changes if we are to continue, as our human civilization, but also in harmony with natural ecosystems. We just celebrated Earth Day last week with the theme of Restore Our Earth. And it's clear that we can't restore our Earth by continuing with the same damaging practices that characterize our economic models. So I'm really glad that we have started this dialogue, and I would love to have you back to continue it and really explore how it can be applied in various settings.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, and let's continue the conversation and talk more about solutions, because there are plenty. Again, we just have to go ahead and make them happen. Again, I want to thank you very much for your work. you are proof that every individual action matters. There is no point in waiting for somebody else to do it for us, whether it's government or corporations, and obviously they also have to act. But our individual and collective action matters a lot. And before we finish, I would like to remind ourselves and everybody else that in the first week of April at Mauna Loa, the Global Monitoring Laboratory in Hawaii, we have reached another record in atmospheric CO2 at 419 ppm, where it should be somewhere around 300, 350 maximum. And if there is anything that should focus our minds, as you were asking, what will get people to act with a sense of emergency, is to look at that number as often as possible as a way to mobilize ourselves to find and adopt solutions to the climate emergency and also the rest of the crises that are confronting us. But with people like you, we can do it.
Yes, we can. So Silvia, where can listeners connect with you?
You can find me easily on LinkedIn, on the Open Source Circular Economy Days forum. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, thank you so much, Silvia, for joining me today and for this very thought-provoking conversation around open source circular economy. And I look forward to continuing the discussion with you.
Thank you very much. Have a very nice springy or summery afternoon.
Thank you for listening to the Climate Conscious Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Climate Conscious. And be sure to check out the Climate Conscious Lifestyle Kit.